We know it's important to study and learn from our history, and with it being 3 years, can you believe that? 3 years since the world shut down due to COVID, my next guest believes it's time to reflect. And more specifically, parenting contributor Heather Johnson wants us to reflect on the impact COVID had on family. What did we learn from the pandemic, and how did it change the family unit moving forward? So Heather joins me right now, and it's funny when I read your topic because I thought most of us, or I don't know, anyway, you just want to forget that it happened. Like, let's pretend that never happened because it was so hard on so many people, but sometimes it's not good to forget.
Not to forget, right? And we all kind of have that feeling. It's like COVID, we have to even say the word again or think about it again. But remember, anniversaries of anything, they're opportunities for us to not just reflect, but to recommit. And we've talked a ton about the politics of it and the medical of it. We've done all that and exhausted it. So this isn't, let's sit back and think about how miserable it was or how challenging it was. But these situations let us learn. And we haven't done a lot where we look at families and say, what has this been like for families? And more importantly, what can families take from it that make us stronger and better moving forward? That's what an anniversary is, right? It's that recommitment to what matters the most as a result of what we learned from the past year, or in this case, the past 3 since we were hit with COVID. So it's just a good time to say, hey, are we on track? And those things that mattered that we learned, what did COVID teach us? Are we doing something with that? Are we actually doing something?
Yes, because I think we have become pretty good at saying, oh, that was something good that came from COVID, whether it's church on your TV or, there's a lot of things that we were like, oh, that was one good thing that came out of COVID. Yeah. So what are some of those lessons or good things that you would say came for families from COVID?
That we're going to keep doing, right?
Yeah.
One of the first is we learned that resilience is everything. Resilience for families, and COVID taught us this, being a resilient family is imperative to your success. One way that I like to look at resiliency would be your ability, if let's say you're going out in the mountains to go for a run, that as you're running, all of a sudden you encounter snow that you weren't anticipating. Being resilient means that you can just take that next step right into the snow, run through it, and then keep going on that run. It's that ability to have something show up on your path that you weren't expecting, and you know how to navigate it. You can see how this concept is key for families to be successful, for them to work together. And one of the things we did learn is to be a resilient family, we need to teach our children how to navigate the emotions that show up when the snow all of a sudden is in front of them that they weren't anticipating. So this resiliency is so important. We worked so hard at being resilient when COVID was right on top of us, but are we still working to teach our children how to navigate emotions so they can be resilient? We want to keep doing it.
Yeah, and it's good to remind them of those things that they overcame during COVID too, and how we made graduation still fun, and maybe you did different, like a virtual prom or whatever. But I do think those kids who were in high school during that time, who just did their best and found ways to make it through, it made a big difference. So reminding people kind of that.
It is, and helping them remember, they don't often, and our kids, even our families, we don't often know what it is we've overcome unless we give it a name, unless we talk it through, unless we remember it. So that's again why anniversaries do matter, even if it's of COVID, because it helps us remember resiliency, it matters. The other thing right along with resiliency is we learn the power of mental health and to give it energy and to pay attention to it. I think up until COVID, especially with our kids and our families, we gave a lot of energy towards physical health. Right? There was a lot of push towards that physical health and what that looked like and what it needed. And now we know that that mental health might even be more important. There were so many challenges that came mentally as a result of COVID. And so right now, our energy needs to go towards that as a family. What does our family's mental health look like? What does our closeness and our flexibility look like? How are we navigating things as they show up mentally and teaching our kids that? And that's twofold. That's us being mentally healthy, and also teaching our kids how to do that too.
And do you think that's something that we need to almost set aside time to deal with? Because I think what happened with COVID is it came and we were all like, oh, we've just been ignoring our mental health because we're so busy, and we were able to do that, and then we weren't able to do that. But now we're busy again. So does that take us like setting aside time specifically to think about our mental health?
Yeah, or even being willing to shift and change the way we live our lives so that mental health can be a part of our everyday. So it isn't, oh, I've got to set aside time, but instead, how can I be mentally healthy each and every minute as I go about what life looks like? COVID should have taught us that we needed to make changes in our family systems, that we needed to do things different to put emphasis on the things that matter most. And our mental health is one of them.
Yes, we can't ignore that anymore. We shouldn't have ever
Yes.
been ignoring it. But your next one is interesting to me because I do think you're talking about creativity, how we can learn it. And I do think a lot of people will say, you're either creative or you aren't. That's something, you're born with. It's genetic, but you think we can learn it.
We can learn it.
I learned it from here a lot.
Absolutely. And I think COVID taught us that. All of us who might not have thought of ourselves as creative, we actually figured out how to be creative really quick, especially when you had kids at home for a year who weren't going to school, right? All of a sudden, I'm not a homeschooling mom, but I better figure out how to be creative and figure those things out. Even those simple changes that families made, I feel like creativity is a byproduct of being curious, and curious is one of the best ways to overcome fear. And when COVID hit, there was so much of that for families, for kids, for adults. We weren't sure, and so we were scared. And it put us in a position where we had to get curious to find the solutions, and the creativity is a byproduct of us looking for those solutions. We can learn it. It also taught us that anything we might not feel we're very good at, we can learn to be better at. Not just creativity, but how cool to have a family system now that looks at one another and says, here's a challenge or here's a fear. And we now know that we can be creative in its problem solving. We can learn to do things that might not be our strong suit. COVID taught us that.
And that was all the change that happened. And that's your next one, is that we need to remember that change isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's positive.
In fact, if we can always look at it as positive, it will benefit us, not as individuals, but also as families. When we look at family theory, it doesn't matter what family theory you look at, every single theory has a point where a family that can't change, adapt, and grow stifles their development. And so seeing change as bad is going to hurt us. It's going to stifle us. We want to ebb and flow when things change. We want to be able to adapt and renegotiate. And that's what change does. COVID gave us an opportunity to realize that to adapt and negotiate to things, again, the resiliency, that can be a really positive thing. Hopefully all of us have something we do differently in our homes now, in our families, as a result of what we went through.
And it's inevitable, so we might as well be positive. And the next one, you're looking outside yourself. We're talking about what it did to our families, but also the community. That matters too.
It does, and I don't think we realized the degree to which we needed community. Some people did because they knew that about themselves, but all of a sudden we realized that we needed community, and technology did a good job trying to help us with that, but we actually know that it's still not as good as in person, as what a community looks like when you're surrounded by people who are there to buoy you up and to support, to differing degrees, right? Depending on if you thrive on that extrovert or introvert, it changes, but we need community. When it comes to families, families are really good at taking from communities. We do a lot of consuming as families, right? We take from public schools, we take from soccer, we take and take and take. So one of the best ways for this to keep going, for your family to recognize the power behind community, is to give back. It's a big deal. Successful and healthy families, they don't just take from communities, they give to communities. So we want to consider that.
To do that as a family just brings it back to your very last point, which is that family relationships come first, and we remember that last of all.
Always, and that's most important. I mean, we were in a situation with COVID, right, where that's all we had. At the end of the day, it was just whoever resided in your home. And so to make sure those family relationships are strong, if there is one single thing besides that resiliency, which ties into it, that we want to take with us, it's that if COVID didn't teach us, we better strengthen, forgive, work through, and get closer to our families. Now's the time. And we want to make sure we're doing that every day.
Thank you so much, Heather. It's good to remember, as much as you may not want to. So to contact Heather Counseling, you can find her information on our website.